I do see homes as being a liability unless you are renting out rooms, unless you actually truly do have cash flow coming in from it.
Welcome to Self-Made and Sober. I'm your host, Andrew Lassis with selfmade-coaching.com. And in this podcast, it's my job to interview people who are not only crushing it in business, but have also struggled with addiction in the past and are in long-term recovery. Be sure to join our Facebook group where we help entrepreneurs grow and scale their business at facebook.com/groups/SMC Mastermind, like Self-Made Coaching Mastermind. I hope you enjoy the show, and be sure to subscribe and rate the show afterwards so you can get notified each Friday when we put out a new episode. Welcome to the Self-Made and Sober podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lassis, and with me today is the magnificent Mandyy Thomas, the financial coach who helps high-income earners get their finances in order and make for a better financial future. Mandyy, how are you?
I am great. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the time this is coming out, congratulations on your 10-year anniversary of sobriety.
Thank you so much.
So early September 2009, what's going on in your life right before you're getting sober? Is everything peachy? Were you running into some trouble with the law? What's your life looking like at that time?
So my parents went through a divorce when I was in grade 12, so when I was 17 years old. And I grew up in a really tiny, small town. And it's kind of just what everybody did was you kind of just drank. It was something that everyone did for fun, and it was something that I did as well. And then when I became 19 years old, I started to realize, like, you know what, maybe I don't identify with drinking as much, but I'm from a small town. Every single person does it. So I actually tried to quit drinking before I officially actually did. And I found it was really difficult, just a lot of peer pressure. It was really tough. And then in September, what ended up happening for me was my friends went back to school and I was in a different location. So we were all apart, which was actually okay. And the weekend that I ended up quitting drinking was I was at work and I wasn't feeling very well. Our family has a genetic heart condition, and I started having these really bad chest pains, and it felt like I was getting stabbed in the chest. So they rushed me to the ER. I was there for 3 days and nothing came back as irregular except that my liver panel was high. And they said, well, have you been drinking? And I said, no, I hadn't drank, and it was about a week and a half. And it was just there that weekend that I had already thought about quitting drinking, that it wasn't, I was doing it more so to numb my feelings of, my parents' divorce. And in that moment I went, my health is so much more important. I already thought that I wanted to quit drinking anyway, so I decided literally right there that weekend in the hospital. I had no idea why the liver panel was high at all, but I thought alcohol sure is not going to make this any better. So where I live, which is in Saskatchewan, our legal drinking age here is 19. So I quit drinking 5 months after I technically actually became legal, which a lot of people say, how on earth did you do it? So one thing was helpful was kind of that wake-up call of, you're kind of having some liver issues, so if you want to keep drinking, it's probably not going to make it any better whatsoever. And my friends going away, which was helpful to give me, because it definitely, even after 6 months, it was so much easier to just say, no, I just don't drink anymore. It's perfectly fine. I'll still have fun. But at first, holy cow, was it really, really difficult, because everybody knew me as Mandyy, who was really fun and bubbly, and it's funny looking back now, I'm like, did I used to be an extrovert, or was that just when I drank alcohol? Because I'm pretty much an introvert now. So it was definitely a process at first of saying, no, I don't want to drink. And it was crazy to see how many people felt uncomfortable because of that, because I felt comfortable. I thought, you know what, I can come out, I can drink a ginger ale, or I can just make sure that everybody gets a safe ride home. Isn't that amazing that someone's being a DD? And it was crazy kind of the backlash that I got from that. My family was super supportive, but a lot of my friends were absolutely not, which was definitely tough.
Yeah, I think getting sober at 19 too, especially when it's that is prime party time. I guess in the States, the equivalent of 21. I know for myself, I never
telling me to get sober at 21 was a death sentence, and I never would have been able to do it at that time. And nonetheless, I mean, I was still drinking at 19 also. So I can definitely relate and understand those feelings that everyone around you is probably saying, like, this is crazy, because I was the other people that saw sober people at that age thinking, you are an insane human. Why would you stop doing that? But so you had health issues, and that brought to surface, and that was enough of a why for you to just, we don't need to keep doing this. This is not beneficial in my life.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because I also really, really stuck with that so much because the thought was already in my mind of like, do I really want to keep drinking? Like, I definitely had fun, but there was something off. There was something I was kind of starting to come to. Maybe you're kind of numbing some stuff. Maybe you're not dealing with, your parents' divorce, different things like that. But then when the health problems came up, it was really a huge wake-up call. My family has, I grew up with a mom who was very sick all the time. She was always in the hospital. My little brothers had 9 heart surgeries. So for me, seeing my little brother who had his first heart surgery when he was 4 months old, that was not his choice. Drinking was my choice. Making my liver worse was my choice. So I went, I'm being a pretty selfish person. If I've seen my family grow up with health problems they never ever asked for, and I'm choosing to drink. So I went, you know what? I think that I should take better care of myself. And if that means stopping drinking, then that's absolutely what I need to do.
So what got you from where you were at while you were drinking and then you're sober? How did you transition into the financial coaching space?
Yeah, so that's definitely a long story, so I'm going to try and keep it short. But basically, our family grew up, we didn't have a lot. And I always knew from a young age, I need to be the person in charge of my financial future, and I didn't want to rely on someone else. So growing up, I always thought, you just get a good paying job. That's what my dad always told me. So I went in to be a power engineer. I went to school for that. I worked as a power engineer for 4 years. I really, really loved what I did. It was shift work, which made it really difficult, but the whole entire time, so I was earning 6 figures. I had no debt. I was managing it super well. I had 6 figures in the bank. But at that point, so that was in my early to mid 20s, I had the most anxiety I ever had around money. It was crazy because I was so worried about losing everything I built up and going back to living with really not a lot. I also came into the workforce in 2008, so that was, during the prime of the recession. And I seen a lot of people I worked with lose a lot of what they spent their entire life working towards. So that fear was in the back of my mind, but I never told anyone I was scared because I was doing well financially, didn't have debt, and I made a lot more money than most of the people I knew. So I was really just scared of my family saying, this is in your head. We wish we had your problems. So I just didn't say anything. And for me, it came out as really high anxiety. And then my coping mechanism then was me turning to food. So then it was binge eating. And I got really, really sick. And so I went back to school for holistic nutrition. I thought I wanted to help people through these health problems that I was going through. And while I was away at school, everything came together, everything came full circle. And I realized most of the reason that I was having these health problems was just due to the high amount of stress from not saying anything, from just keeping it in, and just felt like I was battling something from the inside out. It felt like I was at constant war with myself all day. And I realized, okay, if this is what I was going through as a 6-figure earner with no debt and managing my money well, what about all the other people who aren't really sure what they're doing with their money? People who are actually struggling financially. Like, it has to be so much worse for them than what I was going through, because I was not living paycheck to paycheck. And that's when I realized there was nobody helping people, especially in this demographic. And there was nobody talking about money back then, because that was about 4 years ago. It was a very taboo topic. And I realized that I needed to be vulnerable, share my story, and let people realize that it does not matter what your financial situation is. You absolutely can open up about it. You're allowed to feel however you feel, and then we'll take you from there and help you. Let's put some tangible things in place to really help managing your finances, but then also on the emotional side of how you feel about that as well. And I just seen there was nobody helping anyone doing that. Like, there's financial advisors where people turn to when they think they have enough disposable income to put towards investments. And there's a huge group of people that nobody's really helping them with the day-to-day, and then also talking to them about how they feel, because I felt as a high income earner that I felt this shame that I should not be feeling this way. I should only feel this way when it was the way that I grew up, and I was living a very different lifestyle now. I was really taking care of everything, but I still really suffered because I had the mindset of how I grew up. The management side, I did really well. I really up-leveled that. The mindset, I really needed to work on my mindset around money. And that's when I went, I absolutely need to help these people. I've been through all these struggles for a reason, so I know exactly what people are feeling.
And what was your motivation for doing the coaching side of it as opposed to, say, getting a CFP or being a financial advisor?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I seen that I was going to have some limitations if I went ahead and did that. I wouldn't be able to do things quite the way that I wanted to. And I also knew the way that I spoke about what I had been through was probably a little bit more taboo. If I was with another company, they'd probably tell me not to share certain things, especially such vulnerable things. And that was exactly the reason I knew that I needed to share these things, because nobody else was talking about them. So that's where I went, and I wanted people to feel like I was giving them non-biased information. I was only selling my coaching. There was nothing on the back end of how I was being paid. It was 100% really just helping people get ahead with the budgeting, which a lot of financial advisors, they're not being paid for that, or maybe they're just actually not quite as skilled in that. And that's absolutely okay. And recognizing that different financial professionals know very different things. And it's funny because I actually work with a lot of accountants on their personal finances, because we're all very, in our niche. An accountant does something very different than what we do.
Yeah, I like the thing too that there's a saying, it's the stockbroker, he make sure that he's not broker than you. And I couldn't agree with you more though, because when there's a financial incentive tied behind what you're recommending to somebody, I mean, take out the fact that it's like 90% of hedge fund managers don't beat the S&P 500 index. So you're spending extra money to you're betting how do I phrase this? You are spending more money to statistically do worse. And it's so easy to package it too, because most people don't understand compound interest. So if, say, the financial advisor, they're only charging 1%, and someone says, okay, it's 1%, who cares? But 1% compounded over 40 years with if you put like a $10,000 investment and you let that, you reinvest the dividends, S&P 500, say you make 11% per year, compounded annually, 40 years, you're looking at close to, it's like $1 million, $2 million, but like that 1% of fees is like hundreds of thousands of dollars. And most people don't understand that, and we're never taught it in the school system, at least not in America. Does the Canadian school system, does it teach about personal finance, or is it something you just find out once you're in a hole?
Exactly as you said, it's kind of after the fact, you've learned from kind of your hard lessons. I know some schools are starting to bring it in, but it is still there's so much work to be done there.
Yeah, and when I sit down with clients, I know kind of my day one is budgeting, seeing where it's going, what's coming in, what's going out, how we can manage this, what that looks like. What does your day one look like, or during a discovery session for someone that hires you as a coach?
Yeah, so we have a 2-hour session, and there's a lot of stuff that happens before that 2-hour session. It's all the prep work, getting all the numbers, making sure the numbers are accurate, because a lot of times, they aren't at this point. So I send back a lot of questions ahead of time, get a really accurate view. So basically that first session is where they are now. And I've also asked them intake questions of like, where is it that you want to be? Like specifically, what are the things that are coming up in the pipeline in the next couple of years? But what else do you want to do in your life? And so we're basically taking that and really comparing, okay, where are you at now? Is it a plus at the end of the month? Is it a minus? What do those numbers look like once we take into account? So yes, we're looking at this month's budget, but when I'm working with clients, I'm taking into account the next 12 months, what's coming up for them. And a lot of people aren't. They're not thinking about those bigger expenses, those trips, different things. We're factoring those in right off the bat. So realistically, they can see, is it an income struggle? Is it that they are really living outside of their means? Are they doing better than they think they are? Are they really worried, but things are better? What does all of that look like? And it's really kind of basically we're coming to reality for the first time, seeing where everything's at, getting things collected. So it's basically like, this is a base point and we're going to build from here. So that first thing is just like getting everything super solid of where are you actually at right now. I know a lot of information about them at this time. I've asked every possible question. And then later on from there, then it's the actual cash flow management of implementing the plan. But that first thing is just, this is where we're at, realistically taking everything into account. And if it's partners coming in, a lot of times there's one person typically, as you know, that's probably managing the money a little bit more so than the others, seeing the numbers more often. Sometimes it's that other person going, holy crap, this other person, I see why you're stressed now. This makes sense. So sometimes for couples, it's them coming together, and the one person who's maybe been trying for a while to really get that other person on board, the other person, it's a little bit of a reality, a wake-up check for them, seeing everything all in one place.
So really, step one for you is giving the client the awareness of, here is the black and white of what you're going through, and taking the emotional side out of it. Because I mean, it's just like how, I feel like you're someone that's very analytical, numbers driven. So it was like, oh, drinking isn't healthy, therefore I should stop drinking, and there we go, because that makes black and white sense. I'm assuming you're probably someone that started saving at a young age, and it wasn't just all put in your lap, and you'd probably been taught, if you start saving early, it'll compound over time, and here's how money will grow as a result of starting young. And I was in that group as well. I was just fortunate enough. My parents, my dad was a stockbroker and my mom was a small business investor. So I had gotten that early on. I had taken, I don't usually give college a ton of credit, but I did take one class in personal finance where I had learned about compound interest and starting retirement early. So I was like the guy who had a Roth open at age 18, and now 14 years later, it's like, hey, this thing's like actually growing without, like, good job, Andrew, from 14 years ago. Like, this was a really smart thing, but most people don't even think about it until they're in their 40s or 50s. And I mean, it seems smart, saving 20 years for retirement. That seems like an adequate amount of time. But in reality, if you're not starting way, way before that, there's just so much lost time, literally, by not compounding the earlier in your life and getting those benefits. So what are some of the bigger expenses that people probably come across that they're not really budgeting for on like a monthly basis?
Yeah, so travel is definitely a big one. Gifts. And when people think of gifts, they just think of Christmas. But when I go through with my clients before that very first session, I'm asking them, okay, so how much do you think they'll spend on gifts this year? And I'm breaking it down. There's probably about 9 questions, because I'm talking about birthday gifts throughout the year, Mother's Day gifts, all of the other types of gifts that people don't realize. And when they see how much they actually spend a year on gifts, most people are pretty much floored. And I said, okay, so that's why we need to be saving on a monthly basis, so Christmas isn't so stressful for you this year, because I want you to cash flow your Christmas gifts this year instead of still 6 months later trying to pay it off on your credit card. Clothes is another one that people forget. And what I find especially about clothes is because typically we don't buy clothes on a regular basis. I know for me, I buy clothes literally like once a year. I hate shopping. And actually it's kind of funny because a lot of my clients don't enjoy clothing shopping either. But when we do, we buy a whole bunch that day, and then I'm done for like a year. So you totally forget that, yeah, actually you do buy more clothes or shoes or different things like that. Like we have winter up here, so we'll need things for that. So really, those are 3 things right there. And then anyone who owns a home and doesn't pay maybe their taxes, like your property taxes, on a monthly basis, like I know we were paying ours on a yearly basis. Well, when that comes up, that's quite a bit of money at once. Or your home insurance, anything basically that you are probably maybe paying once a year, that people, it's not a surprise expense, I hear a lot of people call them a whammy expense, but we know every single year that those expenses are going to come up. Other ones that I take into account too, that are when we own like a car, we know that it's going to need to be serviced. We know it's going to probably need to be repaired at some point. So I have my clients saving for those things on a monthly basis. And then also, like, if you're to get into a car accident, I also want you to have money to put towards that deductible. So if something happens, you're doing okay. Because how I see it is, I would much rather have you prepared for 80% of what comes up. And then the other 20% is a whole lot easier to be flexible with. But we need to think about those things in our life that come up, like a medical deductible. In Canada, medical is very different than the States. So when I work with my American clients, let's say they don't have health insurance. Well, that's something very near and dear to my heart because of the health problems in our family. There are very serious health problems. So I will share my story about the heart problems in our family, so people understand, because if you haven't been through those, you're not seeing maybe that you need health insurance, or to save on a monthly basis to put towards if you do need to use that deductible. So those are some of those expenses that people don't really think about. Even things like paying for your accountant once a year. Let's save for those things a little bit each month, so when those expenses come up, it's so much easier. You're not putting them on your credit card. And then also you're seeing realistically how much it actually costs you truly to live your life. Because I know when people first come to me and they see what their budget is, they're like, that's a lot higher than I expected. And I say, for about 90% of people, that's exactly the response that they give me.
And I'm just curious of your experience. I've found that after speaking with family, like that first session, I feel like they usually it's like the whole gambit of emotions. Like they come in kind of unsure, kind of scared, and then 30 minutes into it, they start kind of opening up, seeing, hey, this isn't what I thought it was. And I always have a joke in the beginning. I say, how much do you think your life costs each day to live? And then they write down the number, and then we come out, and it's usually half. Most people coming into it sitting with a financial coach, so they've done a little prep work. It's not even like it's off guard, but most people don't consider those yearly expenses, and they really are constant. So what are some of the tactics that you use to help people save for these?
Yeah, so before that first session, I will have all those expenses listed on my spreadsheet. A lot of times, sometimes people will answer them, sometimes they won't. So that's where I send the questions back to get further clarification based on their lifestyle. And I will start to, so we come up, what we do is for each of those categories, so let's say travel, I'll ask, what are you planning to do in the next 12 months for travel? And even if you're not sure but you would like to do it, what would that look like? And then for travel, obviously that's going to be a super estimated one right off the bat. Later on, we'll go and we will figure it out more in detail, but right off the bat, we just want an estimate. So for each of those kind of yearly type expenses, we think, what would that look like for the year? And then we divide it by 12, and each month that's what we want to be saving. So that's what we work towards. And then what I have my clients do is they open up a separate savings account for each of those. So some of my clients might have 6 separate savings accounts. Some might have 9. It really depends on their lifestyle. And so what I see a lot of times is when we only have one savings account, there's a lot of shame of dipping into it to pay for when these expenses come up. But that's a thing, when we have these types of savings accounts, we know that these specific savings accounts, they're not going to grow exponentially, because the whole point of them is to use for those expenses that are coming up. And then you can have a separate savings account that, let's say, maybe that's for saving for a house or for something, for a wedding, different things like that. Those savings accounts can continue to grow more so. And these other ones, now they don't feel the shame of dipping into it, which I didn't realize how impactful that was at first on the emotional side for them. So that's really helpful. And then things like a vehicle, I take into account, like up here, we need to put winter tires on in the wintertime. Everyone kind of seems to forget about tires, or just replacing your tires, oil changes, thinking about their deductible, because it's really interesting to see when people guess what they would put towards those accounts is a lot of times really a lot less than what they actually really need to be putting towards it. So it's really interesting because it's bridging the gap of their awareness too, of like, holy cow, you're right. Or when people own homes, a lot of times I see they don't put anything for home repairs. And I think if you're just to do one little project on your home, that's like $1,500 a lot of times if you want to put a deck on, different things like that. So it's really interesting to see that. But basically, you putting that money into those savings accounts, you also know exactly how much you have versus what I see. I call this accidental overspending, when you have one savings account and you're tapping into it to pay for different things, you don't really realize you're usually saving for like 7 different things in that one account. There's no transparency as to how close you are to each goal. So when you have all those accounts separate, you can see, okay, I have $300 for gifts. You almost go into the store subconsciously having a little bit of a budget in mind because that's what you have in that account. So it's really, really helpful. And it's, for me, it's crazy to see how my clients completely, their mindset, their perspective, how it changes after they start funding those accounts. It's so cool to see them grow as people and their mindset once they start putting money into there. And for them to, for the first time, to cash flow those expenses when they come up, because a lot of times they put travel on credit cards and they're paying it off a lot later. It is so cool to see the excitement and confidence when they have paid for something in cash that they've never done before.
Yeah, I think a lot of the finance, it's similar to diet and exercise. It's like, we know we need to be saving. We know that we shouldn't be splurging, but just this once isn't gonna hurt everything. But the problem is the mindset of just this once, if it happens even once a week. I know for a lot of my clients, it was, how much money do you spend eating out each week? And it was like, I don't know, like, well, let's think about it. Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then, once or twice. I guess we spend like $400 a week on eating out. And it was like, if you cut that in half, would that be insanely detrimental to your life? And they're like, no. And I say, well, there's $10,000 by substituting a meal with the family versus eating out. And when you do eat out, it doesn't always have to be some crazy expense. Maybe you cut back. We talk about changing from a Ruth's Chris to an Outback. Like, you still get the experience. Yes, it's not the top of the top, but at the same time, you're accomplishing 90% of the experience at half the cost, and that can help you keep above water with your cash flow. So do you have any apps that you get your clients signed up with, or is this Excel spreadsheets? What does that look like for you?
So at the beginning of my coaching, I was using an online app, and then I changed to an Excel spreadsheet because what I found was I was able to be a lot more proactive with my clients in actually planning out their future versus when we were using a budgeting software. What I found was it was a little bit more transactionary. It was a little bit more reactive. And I was like, you know what? I'm not quite getting the results that I want to see with my clients. So that's where we switched to the spreadsheet. And I'm very, very happy with that. And it's going to take a lot to change my mind to go to something else.
That's interesting. I like that. I had never really thought about that, but you're absolutely right. When there are the apps, it is telling you after the fact, after the problem has already happened, hey, by the way, we blew it. Sorry. No, we're in the same situation. So your approach is very, very proactive as opposed to reactive. I think that's incredible, and that you're getting great results for your clients. So obviously something's working. So you have the ability to I guess spot the trends of things. Like with your sobriety, you knew it wasn't good for your health. With finances, you kind of had that feeling on the inside. But what are some ways that you kind of get past the self-talk and the negative self-talk? I'm guessing you probably still run into that despite where you're at. What are some of the tools or tactics that you use to get past the negative self-talk on be it sobriety or with your financial situation?
Absolutely. So something that works really well for me, and I'll be honest, I was so resistant at first. So this especially helped me for the anxiety around money, which in turn actually did improve my financial situation. Because when I had the anxiety around money, I went and ate. And then that was, like you said, about the eating out. Well, that's one of the biggest things that I work with my clients, because that is I see it so commonly. But that was also my struggle too, was when the anxiety hit, I went and I would eat a whole bunch of carbs. And my eating out was significantly higher. So when I was able to work through that anxiety, I was also able to really save a lot more money. But for me, it was journaling. And I was working with a coach, and she kept telling me to journal. I had no idea how to start journaling. Had no clue. And I'm a very, as you can tell, like I'm an A-type personality. I'm a recovering perfectionist. So I felt like I pretty much needed to know ahead of time what was going to happen when I journaled. And when I finally journaled for the first time, it felt like I lost like 30 pounds. I started writing and all these thoughts just came out, and just me giving light to them was huge for me. And I was always scared, if someone read this, different things like that, totally just burn it afterwards, like very carefully, obviously. But if you're scared of someone else finding out about something, but you need to get the thoughts out of your body, you need, like, journal, do whatever it is that makes you feel the best. Like, I'm also someone who will talk to myself. That's my personality type. So I'll go on a walk. Nature, I found, is huge for me, for really, really helpful. So I'll go on a walk, and I just need to process things. I just need to talk it out loud. So that's been really helpful for me. I did also see a counselor. That was also really good. I found it was really difficult. I always had to be the strongest one in my family. So for me, actually putting a voice to my feelings has been something I've really struggled with, and something that I've had to work really hard on. So it was at first me going to counselor. It was me writing a letter, me reading off that letter to the people I loved, because I was always scared of how someone else would think, or how someone else would feel if I was really honest. So really figure out whatever works best for you. But I find journaling is like a really low barrier to entry, because if you're scared to talk to someone about something, you don't have to say anything to them. You can just get those thoughts out. And once I started to get them down, it was really neat to see how the power was lost then. I was scared that by putting them down, it was going to make them have more of an impact on me, and it actually had such a less impact. So sometimes, like even 2 days ago, I wrote a whole bunch of stuff down and then I burned it. And it was just that release that I needed. And it was really, really helpful. And it's also remembering to do this on a continuous basis, because no matter where we're at, we still need to keep working on our mindset. The next level, we have different mindset struggles that it is we're working through. So just start seeing what works for you. I know journaling has been instrumental for me, as well as meditation. How I meditate is different. I can't just sit in silence. That's not really me. So I do guided meditations, and they've been really, really helpful to work on the stress management side. So I'd say there's kind of two pieces there. Is first, like, having the awareness of why do you truly feel that way, or where are those thoughts coming from, and really addressing like what's at the bottom of that. So whether that's talking to someone about your finances, different things, like what is the root stressor, but then also stress management. So I think there are two aspects that you need to work on. Both of them is managing the stress, but then also really addressing it, which sometimes can be super messy and feel uncomfortable. And it can feel like a disaster at first, but holy is it beautiful on the other side of that.
That's such a great insight. And I'm curious, do you have any books that have helped you as far as being a financial coach, or books that you recommend to your clients for resources on how to self-manage if maybe they weren't the right fit, or for people that are your clients that want to learn more on their own? Do you have one or two books that are your go-tos?
So there's a couple of money mindset books that I really liked for people who are struggling around the mindset side of things. I do have a lot of people that ask me like, well, how do you achieve this without sacrificing? And that's a very long conversation to have. So sometimes I state, like, work on your mindset, because when you're already focusing on the fact that you think you're going to be sacrificing, it's going to be difficult, because that's already what you're focusing on. So there's a few different books. There's one called Get Rich, Lucky Bitch. So that's one that I really liked that was really helpful. That's definitely a more spiritual book for sure. When it comes to actually managing your finances for women, there's another one, and it's by Nicole Lapin, Lapin, and the name of the book is escaping me right now. I really like that one specifically for women, because it's actually a little bit more entertaining too. So it's not a really, really dry read. It's more entertaining, but she is really giving you actual practical steps. And she talks about how things were a little bit of a disaster for her. That's why that she dove into finances. So I really like how she teaches it. And the name was there, and now it has escaped me.
Is it? Well, I just did a quick Google search. I see Rich Bitch, Becoming Superwoman, Boss Bitch, Rich Bitch.
Yeah, it is,
All
yeah.
right, so you have an affinity for the bitch books.
Apparently.
Get Rich, Lucky Bitch, and Rich Book, Rich Bitch.
Yes.
Oh, that's great. Do you have any other bitchin' recommendations?
I would say start with those couple of books. And I also, one of the books that I was introduced for the personal finance side, and really also just expanding my mindset, because I came from a small town. My parents had a very narrow mindset when it came to money, was the Rich Dad Poor Dad. So that was one of the ones I think I started with. I'm going to say I was about 16 or 17. That was really helpful just to see that there are actually very different ways to earn money. And I always knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur from a very young age. I had started my first business at 11 and my second one at 14. But as I got older, I wasn't really sure what that looked like as a full-time thing. So I really like that book just to honestly expand and see there's so many different ways for personal finance. And I really love that one for that.
And I know the idea on Rich Dad Poor Dad. One of the things that I always ask people that are in the finance industry, what are your views on getting a mortgage, paying it down, future value of money? What's your view on the house as an asset or liability? What's your take on that?
So I think when it comes to being a homeowner, there's so much more research that people need to be doing before ever buying their first home, because I'm a person who's bought a home and because I've sold a home. So I've seen both sides there. I think that the day and age that we live in, as considering a home as an asset, for me personally, I don't agree with that as much. A lot of people think, okay, once it's paid off, then that's it. And it's like, no, you still have a lot of expenses. Like, I know where we lived, the property taxes for our home were very high. And I thought, geez, even when we get our home paid off, we still have a lot of expenses from this home. So a lot of people that think nowadays, it really depends where you're at. I think that there's a lot more work that needs to go behind, but I do see homes as being a liability unless you are renting out rooms, unless you actually truly do have cash flow coming in from it. So really seeing that perspective. And I know that's one of the things that I see a lot, is a lot of people who are house poor because the way that they were approved for their mortgage, there's some people that I went, oh my gosh, I have no idea how you were approved for this or for the second home. And they really, how I look at it is, you need to take into account everything. You need to take into account the mortgage, property taxes, your insurance, utilities, see how much that comes to. And if that's over 33% of your living expenses, it's going to make your life feel really stressful, because you have such high fixed expenses that unless you start to earn more, it's going to be really difficult in a lot of other areas of your life. So I do truly see home ownership as a liability unless you're actually getting cash flow off that. Now, that's just my personal opinion.
Yeah, there's a million different views on it, but it's always interesting to hear the perspective from somebody that's in the day-to-day. And I have a friend who recently purchased a house. You know, he was told it's the American dream and he makes good money, so it was the next logical move. He's not going to waste money, air quotes, on rent. And he's spent, I think, $10,000 in 6 months on just AC repairs. So it's like, all right, you know, you've got this asset, and I don't believe they put down 20% either. So they're now, instead of wasting money on rent, they're wasting money on PMI and all these different aspects. And you're right, it's not cash flow positive. Like the houses that I own, I have them rented out, and I've got renters paying for everything. So I have an appreciating asset, and yes, the costs that are associated with it are paid by the people who are living there. And we do have a mortgage on our house, but I had made the exact point that you had brought up with my first house. We own it outright, but I still have to pay, it's like $5,000-$6,000 a year in property taxes. And if I don't pay that, my house gets taken away from me. So I don't even own the thing that we've been sold on, the idea of, wow, I get to own my house outright, except for I don't. And I still have payments that have to be made. And so there's no difference between that and renting, other than, okay, if I want to put an addition on the house, I need to ask permission. But if you live in an HOA, you have to do that anyway. So there's just so many ways that disprove that a house is an asset, because it's in a lot of ways a money pit, unless you're renting it out, or if you're Airbnb-ing like spare rooms or something. Like, you can make cash flow from it, but 99% of people don't do that. They live in their liability that's been told is an asset. And again, no one's really educated on this stuff. It's just like, well, I'm in my 30s and I make money. Time to own a house because that's what I was told. But the people who are renting that want to own a house, they're excited too. I'm going to be a homeowner. But the difference of being a homeowner versus a renter is really, it's not much difference. And you're stuck. If you want to get out and the market's tanked, you've lost money. So there's not even, it doesn't always appreciate. There's so many different myths that are associated with it. And I love that Rich Dad, Poor Dad really lays it out. And when that came out, Kiyosaki was under a lot of scrutiny. They're saying, how dare you say the house is a liability? It is an asset. It is the American dream. And then the market tanked, the housing market tanked, and then everyone's like, you were so right. But it's crazy because even though the facts are there, we've just been sold on this idea that the American dream, own a house. Or is it the Canadian dream as well?
It really is. And even if you would ask me this question 5 years ago, I would have had a different opinion. But going through owning and selling, and it wasn't even like we were living in a home that was outside of our means, but just seeing once everything, at the end of the month, how much you truly are paying for everything, it really is. I used to think renting was throwing your money away because that's what we're told. So I just truly believe that. Well, coming out on the other side, I'm like, you know what? You really have to compare really, really well to see what is the best for you. But then also, a lot of people are just thinking of right now. They're not thinking like that they actually hate their job and they want to change it. Well, that's gonna bring up a lot more stress for you if you want to change, or if you want to become an entrepreneur later on. You probably want to have more flexibility, and you probably don't want your money put into your house at that time, because if you have to pull it out. Also, just because I've been through a couple of different times in the housing market being down, and in Canada right now, our housing market isn't in the best place right now. So when I'm seeing it right now, I do see a lot of people who are stuck in their homes and the stress that they feel because of that.
That's very, very interesting. And I like to hear other people's perspective on it. But Mandy, in wrapping up, where can people learn more about your coaching services? Where can they find you online? And we'll link all these in the show notes.
Sure. So you can check me out on my website at mandythomas.com. Mandy is with 2 Y's. And I do, most of my information that I share is on Instagram. I like to share a lot on Instagram stories. So that's Mandyy Thomas with 2 Y's. And I would love for the person listening, if you would just send both of us a message on Instagram just to say what your biggest takeaway was. I would be so excited to hear that.
Absolutely. And for those that aren't following the show yet, at Self-Made Sober on Instagram, facebook.com/selfmade sober. And if you enjoyed the episode, really appreciate a rating on iTunes, and be sure to follow Mandy, reach out to her. And it was so great having you on the show, Mandy, and thanks for being on.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to Self-Made and Sober. Be sure to join our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/SMC Mastermind, like Self-Made Coaching Mastermind. I hope you enjoyed the show, and be sure to subscribe and rate the show so you can get notified each Friday when we put out a new episode.